During a business trip while shopping in a supermarket, I spotted a disheveled woman holding a baby trying to pay for a can of formula. I walked closer and froze. It was my daughter. She was supposed to be living comfortably at her husband's family home in another city right now. I pulled her aside, and the moment she saw me, she burst into tears. "Dad, they abandoned me here," she sobbed, as the baby girl in her arms started crying too. My blood boiled. I took her to a safe place and made a phone call. They messed with the wrong person. Welcome to Dad's Revenge Stories. I am incredibly grateful to have you here. To help us grow, please drop a comment showing which city or country you are watching from today. Note: this story includes fictionalized elements for entertainment and education. Any similarity to actual names or settings is coincidental, but the message is highly valuable. The hotel room was too quiet. I had stayed in hundreds of rooms like this one over the past 30 years. King-sized bed with crisp white linens, a minibar I never touched, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking whatever city I happened to be in that week. The Harborview Inn in Myrtle Cove, South Carolina, was no different, except that tonight, the quiet felt heavier than usual. It pressed against my chest like something I could not name. I stood at the window with my hands in my pockets, looking out at the dark stretch of the Atlantic Ocean. The town was small, the kind of place where the grocery store closed at 10, and everybody knew everybody else's business by Tuesday morning. I had not chosen Myrtle Cove for its charm. I had chosen it because of a name that kept appearing in the wrong places. 3 weeks ago, my financial analyst had flagged an anomaly in a routine audit. A regional development company called Coastal Meridian LLC was quietly purchasing commercial property along the South Carolina shoreline. The purchases were structured in an unusual pattern, small tranches rotating through 4 different subsidiary accounts, timed to avoid federal reporting thresholds. The kind of paperwork that was designed to look ordinary to anyone who was not paying close attention. I was always paying close attention. When I dug deeper, Coastal Meridian LLC traced back through 2 layers of shell corporations to a holding company registered in Delaware. That holding company had the same registered agent as 3 other entities I recognized immediately, entities connected to the Belmont family of New York. I pressed my forehead briefly against the cold glass of the window. Victoria Belmont, the woman who had assured me with a warm smile and a firm handshake that her son Julian was the right man for my daughter Clara. The woman who had sat across from me at a dinner table in Manhattan 18 months ago and told me she thought of Clara as her own daughter. I had believed her. That was the part I could not forgive myself for. 3 weeks ago, when I told Victoria I was concerned about Clara, that her calls had become less frequent, that something in her voice sounded distant and strained, Victoria had been perfectly calm. "Clara is resting, Richard," she had told me. "Her therapist recommended a private wellness retreat. No outside contact for 60 days. She asked us to let you know she was fine." She had even sent me a printed letter supposedly from Clara asking me not to worry. The handwriting was close, but it was not my daughter's. I had spent 2 weeks trying to convince myself I was wrong. Clara was an adult. She had built a life with Julian. I had promised myself I would not be the kind of father who suffocated his child with worry. But every morning I woke up with the same cold weight in my stomach, the same voice telling me that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. So I came to South Carolina. Not because I had proof, because I had a feeling I had learned over 62 years of life never to ignore. I turned away from the window and picked up my jacket from the back of the chair. The room was too quiet, and I was too restless for another night of staring at financial documents and telling myself to be patient. There was a grocery store 2 blocks from the hotel I had passed it when the car dropped me off that afternoon. I needed antacids and something cold to drink, and honestly, I needed to be somewhere with other people even strangers, even just for 20 minutes. The November air hit me the moment I stepped outside, sharp and salt-edged, the kind of cold that came off the ocean and got into your collar, no matter how well you buttoned your coat. The main street of Myrtle Cove was nearly empty at this hour. A diner on the corner still had its lights on. A couple walked their dog on the opposite sidewalk. The town had the particular stillness of a place that had already settled in for the night. The grocery store was called Henderson's Market. The sign above the entrance was missing the letter E in market, so it read Henderson's Marked in faded red lettering. The automatic door stuttered when it opened, catching for half a second before sliding the rest of the way. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly. A teenager was mopping the floor near the produce section with the exhausted expression of someone counting down the minutes to the end of a shift. I picked up a basket and moved down the first aisle. The store was nearly empty. An older man was studying the labels on soup cans with the serious concentration of a scholar. A woman with two young boys trailing behind her was comparing prices on cereal boxes. The whole place smelled like floor cleaner and overripe bananas, and there was a country song playing softly through a speaker somewhere near the ceiling that kept cutting in and out. I found the antacids in aisle 4 and was reaching for a bottle of sparkling water when I heard it coming from the direction of the checkout lanes at the front of the store. A baby crying. Not the casual, fussing kind of cry that babies made when they were bored or tired. This was the sharp, insistent cry of a newborn who had not eaten. I had not heard that sound in 30 years, but a man does not forget it. It hit something old and deep in my chest. And then, underneath the crying, a woman's voice, low and desperate, trembling at the edges, in the way that a person's voice trembled when they were trying not to completely fall apart in public. "Please," she was saying, "please, can you try it one more time? I know it should work. Please." I set the sparkling water down and walked toward the front of the store. There were 2 checkout lanes open. The lane on the left had the older man with his soup cans. The lane on the right, I stopped walking. A woman stood at the register. She was thin in a way that was not healthy, wearing a gray sweater that was 2 sizes too large for her, and jeans that had been washed so many times the knees had gone pale. Her hair was pulled back roughly, not styled, just pushed away from her face like she had done it in the dark. She was holding an infant against her left shoulder, and the baby was crying with the full force of a small body that had been hungry for too long. On the counter in front of her was a single can of infant formula. The cashier, a middle-aged woman with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, was shaking her head with the uncomfortable expression of someone who genuinely wished they could do something different. "Honey, I ran it twice. The cards coming back declined. I'm sorry." "I don't understand," the woman said, and her voice cracked on the last word. "It had a balance this morning. I checked it this morning." I took another step closer, and the fluorescent light shifted, and I saw her face. My sparkling water bottle hit the floor. The sound it made when it bounced was very loud in the quiet store. The woman at the register turned at the noise, and our eyes met across 6 feet of linoleum flooring, and the entire world compressed into a single terrible second. I knew that face. I had known that face since the moment a nurse placed a 7-pound, 2-ounce baby girl into my arms in a hospital in Manhattan 31 years ago. And I had looked down and understood for the first time in my life what it meant to love something more than yourself. "Clara," I said. The word came out of me like a breath I had been holding for months. My daughter stared at me. Her lips parted. And then her face broke open completely, every wall she had been holding up collapsing at once, and she said the only word she could manage. "Dad." She said it again, softer this time, like she was not sure the word was still allowed to belong to her. "Dad." I crossed the distance between us in 4 steps. I did not think about it. I did not plan it. My body simply moved the way it had moved 31 years ago, when a 2-year-old Clara had wobbled off a playground step, and I had caught her before she hit the ground. Pure reflex, pure need, the oldest instinct a father carries. I put my arms around her, and she collapsed into me. The baby, my granddaughter, though my mind was still struggling to hold that word, was pressed between us, and she let out a sharp, startled cry at the sudden closeness. Clara was shaking. Not shivering from the cold, but shaking from somewhere much deeper, the kind of trembling that happens when a person has been holding themselves together by sheer force of will for so long that the moment someone else shows up, every muscle they have been clenching simply gives out at once. "I've got you," I said into her hair. My voice came out rougher than I intended. "Clara, I've got you. I'm right here." She did not speak for a long moment. She pressed her face against my shoulder and made a sound I had never heard from her before. Not quite a sob, not quite a cry. Something more broken than either of those things, like a sound that had been trapped inside her chest for weeks and had finally found the only exit it recognized. The cashier had gone very still behind the register. The teenager who had been mopping the floor near the entrance had stopped moving entirely, leaning on his mop handle and looking at the floor with the careful, deliberate focus of someone pretending they were somewhere else. I loosened my arms just enough to look at her. She was so thin. That was the thing that hit me hardest, harder, even than the worn-out clothes or the exhaustion carved into her face. Clara had always been slender, but she had been healthy, bright-eyed, and sure of herself, the kind of young woman who walked into a room and took up exactly the space she was entitled to. The woman standing in front of me had been hollowed out. Her cheekbones were too sharp. Her wrists, where they wrapped around the baby, were fragile in a way that made something behind my sternum clench painfully. "Let me take her," I said, reaching for the baby. "Let me hold her so you can breathe." Clara hesitated for just a fraction of a second, the hesitation of a mother who had learned the hard way that she was the only person her child could count on. Then she transferred the baby into my arms with the careful, practiced motion of someone who had done it 1,000 times in the past few months. The baby was tiny. Far too tiny, it seemed to me, though I knew newborns were supposed to be small. She was wrapped in a receiving blanket that had been washed so many times it had gone thin, and her face was scrunched and red from crying, her small mouth working urgently, searching. She could not have been more than 4 or 5 months old. "Her name is Lily," Clara said. Her voice was steadier now, but only barely. "She was born in August. While I had been sitting in board meetings and flying between New York and Chicago and Los Angeles, my daughter had given birth to this child somewhere I had not known about, in circumstances I had not known about, and had spent the months since then fighting to keep both of them alive. "Hello, Lily," I said quietly. My granddaughter's face was still scrunched with hunger and displeasure, and she was not remotely interested in being soothed by a stranger. But I held her firmly against my chest, the way I had held Clara 31 years ago, and I felt her tiny body register the warmth and the steadiness and begin very reluctantly to stop fighting quite so hard. I turned to the cashier. "The formula," I said. "Ring it up, please." And anything else she came in for. The cashier, her name tag said. Donna reached for the can of formula with the efficient compassion of someone who had seen hard times walk through her checkout lane before. "That's the only thing, sir," she said, glancing at Clara. "Just the one can." "Add whatever formula you have in stock behind the counter," I said. "The same brand, if you have it. 3 cans. Dad, you don't have to." "Clara." I said her name quietly, and she stopped. Not because I was silencing her, but because she heard something in the way I said it, The same thing she had heard in my voice when she was 7 years old, and had tried to tell me she was not scared of the thunderstorm keeping her awake at 3 in the morning. She had always been able to tell when I was holding something back so she would not have to carry it. I handed my credit card to Donna without looking at the total. While Donna processed the transaction, I looked at my daughter properly for the first time. The fluorescent light above us was doing her no favors, but even in that harsh light, even with everything the past months had taken from her, I could see her, the real her, the one I had raised, still present underneath all of it. The line of her jaw, the way she stood with her shoulders slightly back even when she was exhausted, a habit she had inherited from her mother. The look in her eyes that was not defeat, not quite, but something that had been pressed very close to it for a very long time. "How long?" I asked. I kept my voice low and even. "How long have you been here in this town?" Clara looked down at the counter. Her fingers found the edge of the conveyor belt and held on. "About a month," she said. "Since mid-October." A month. October. 31 days during which I had accepted the explanation I was given because I had not wanted to be the father who could not let his daughter live her own life. 31 days during which Lily had been 4 months old, then 4.5 months old, growing in whatever conditions this town had offered them. "Where have you been staying?" I asked. Clara lifted her eyes to mine, and the look on her face told me the answer was going to be something I was not prepared for, something that was going to require every ounce of composure I had spent 6 decades learning how to maintain. "I'll show you," she said. "But Dad—" She reached out and touched my arm just lightly, just her fingertips. "I need you to hold it together when you see it. For Lily's sake. She picks up on everything." I looked down at the baby in my arms. Lily had finally stopped crying. Her eyes were closed, her small chest rising and falling with the particular exhausted peace of a child who has worn herself out. She weighed almost nothing, and she trusted me completely, the way babies trusted anyone who held them warmly and steadily, with no understanding yet of how rarely the world deserved that kind of trust. "I'll hold it together," I told my daughter. I meant it when I said it. But as Donna handed back my card and bagged the formula cans, and as Clara picked up the bags with hands that were steadier than they had any right to be, and as I followed my daughter out of Henderson's Market into the sharp November air, with my granddaughter against my chest, I was already bracing myself, because I knew my daughter. And if she was warning me to hold it together, then whatever I was about to see was going to make holding it together the hardest thing I had ever done. My car was a black Lincoln Navigator that my assistant had arranged through a local rental agency when I landed in Myrtle Cove 3 days ago. It was the kind of vehicle that felt out of place on these narrow coastal streets, too polished, too large, too certain of itself, against the backdrop of a town that had seen better decades. I buckled Lily into the back seat using the infant carrier that Clara produced from a battered canvas bag, her fingers moving through the familiar snaps and adjustments with the automatic efficiency of a mother who had done it in the dark, in the cold, in conditions I had not yet seen, but was already beginning to dread. Clara sat beside her daughter in the back. She gave me directions in a quiet, flat voice left at the stop sign: follow the road past the hardware store. Turn right, where the street light was out. The street light had apparently been out for weeks. Nobody had fixed it. I drove slowly. The town thinned out as we moved away from the main street, the buildings becoming fewer and farther between the road surface, deteriorating from cracked asphalt to packed dirt with ruts that made the Navigator rock gently from side to side. Lily had fallen asleep again, her head lolling against the padded side of the carrier, with the absolute boneless trust of an infant who had finally eaten and could afford to let go for a while. "Here," Clara said. "Pull over here." I pulled over. I looked through the windshield, and I did not speak for a moment, because I was doing the thing she had asked me to do, holding it together. The structure in front of us was a construction project that had been abandoned midway through its second or third floor. Concrete pillars rose up from the ground at regular intervals, supporting a poured ceiling above, but the walls between the pillars had never been built. There were no windows. There were no doors. The ground floor was open on all four sides to the November wind coming off the ocean, which tonight had a particular cutting quality that found every gap in a person's clothing and worked its way in. A section of temporary construction fencing had been knocked down on the left side. Overgrown grass and a few stubborn weeds pushed up through cracks in the concrete floor near the entrance. I cut the engine. "Clara," I said. "I know," she said. "Come inside. I want you to see it properly." I did not want to see it properly. Every instinct I had was telling me to put the car back in drive, get on the highway, and put as many miles between my daughter and this place as possible before either of us said another word. But Clara was already opening the car door, and I understood that she needed me to see it, not because she wanted my horror or my guilt, but because she needed someone who loved her to bear witness to what she had survived. So I got out of the car. The wind hit me immediately. It was rawer out here than it had been in town, unobstructed by buildings carrying the particular damp cold of the South Carolina coast in late autumn. I followed Clara through the gap in the fencing and into the open ground floor of the unfinished building. It was darker inside than outside, if that was possible. The concrete pillars cast irregular shadows, and the ceiling above us blocked what little light came from the stars. Clara pulled a small flashlight from her canvas bag, a cheap hardware store flashlight, the kind that came in a 3-pack, and clicked it on. The beam was narrow but steady. She walked me to the far corner of the ground floor, where one of the concrete pillars created a slight angle that broke some of the wind, and she shone the flashlight down. I looked at what was on the ground. Then I crouched down beside it, because I needed to be closer, because some part of me was insisting that I was misreading what I was seeing. I was not misreading it. There was a flattened cardboard box spread across the concrete, two of them actually layered on top of each other, for what I imagined passed for cushioning. On top of the cardboard was a sleeping bag that had once been blue and was now a faded, indeterminate gray, its zipper broken, so that it lay open like a blanket. Beside the sleeping bag was a small stack of items arranged with the kind of deliberate, exhausted neatness of someone who had very little and had learned to keep careful track of all of it. 2 clean onesies folded precisely, a travel-size container of baby wipes, a half-empty package of diapers, a small Ziploc bag containing what looked like a few crackers, and a granola bar. And underneath the edge of the cardboard, where someone had thought to put it for waterproofing, was a single flattened plastic garbage bag. My granddaughter had been sleeping on cardboard on a concrete floor in a building with no walls for 31 days. I pressed my hand flat against the surface of the cardboard. It was cold and slightly damp at the edges where the wind reached it. I stayed crouched there for longer than was probably necessary, my hand on that damp cardboard, because I was working very hard on the thing Clara had asked me to do. "Clara," my voice came out lower than I intended. "How did you eat?" "There's a soup kitchen 2 blocks from here," she said. She was standing behind me, the flashlight still in her hand. Her voice was matter-of-fact in the way that voices became when a person had moved past the point of feeling sorry for themselves and into the territory of simple endurance. "They're open for lunch 5 days a week. On the other days, I found a church that leaves bags of groceries on the front steps on Tuesday and Friday mornings. The pastor knows I've been coming. He left extra diapers once without making a big deal out of it." I stood up slowly. My knees ached in the way they had been aching more frequently over the past few years, a reminder that I was 62 and not 42. I turned to face her. The flashlight beam was pointed at the ground between us, and in its upward reflected light, I could see her face more clearly than I had in the fluorescent brightness of the grocery store. She looked tired in a way that sleep alone was not going to fix. But she was looking at me steadily, and what I saw in her expression was not shame exactly. It was more like the careful watchfulness of someone waiting to see how the person in front of them was going to handle the truth. I was handling it. Barely. But I was handling it. "There's something else," Clara said. She shifted the flashlight to her left hand and reached into the canvas bag with her right, moving past the diapers and the spare onesie and the flashlight batteries until her hand found what she was looking for. She pulled it out and held it against her chest without showing it to me yet. It was small, smaller than a paperback book. "I've been carrying this since the night they took me here. I haven't told anyone about it. I haven't even looked at it since I put it in the bag, because I was afraid that if I thought about it too much, I'd do something with it before the right moment." "What is it?" I asked. "Not yet," she said quietly. There was something in the way she said it, deliberate, almost careful, that told me she had been rehearsing this moment in her mind for a long time. "I'll tell you when we're somewhere safe. When Lily is settled and warm, and I don't have to worry about her for 5 consecutive minutes." She tucked the item back into the bottom of the bag and pulled the canvas drawstring closed. "Right now, I just need to get out of here, Dad. I need to not sleep on that floor one more night." I looked at the cardboard bed one more time. Then I looked at my daughter. "Leave the bag," I said. "Leave everything here except Lily's things and whatever you're holding. We are not coming back for any of it." Clara's chin lifted slightly. "The bag comes with me," she said. There was something in her voice that was not negotiable, quiet, but absolute. The tone of a woman who had given up a great many things over the past month and had decided somewhere along the way that this one thing she would not give up. I nodded. "Then the bag comes with us," I said. "Let's go get your daughter." The drive took 40 minutes. I had purchased the property outside Myrtle Cove 11 years ago, when the South Carolina coastline was still the kind of investment that required patience rather than capital. It was not my primary residence that was the apartment on the Upper East Side of Manhattan that I had lived in for 23 years, and that felt on most evenings approximately as warm and personal as an airport terminal. The coastal house was where I came when I needed to think without the city telling me what to think about. I had not been here in 8 months. I called ahead from the car. 1 ring, then 2, and then a voice that was alert despite the hour, because Eleanor Higgins had spent 34 years training herself to answer my calls with the same composure at 11 at night as she did at 11 in the morning. "Mr. Sterling." Her voice was steady and warm. The voice of a woman who had managed this family's household through 4 presidents, 2 recessions, and the death of my wife. "I saw your name on the screen and thought you might be calling about the heat. I turned it on this afternoon when I heard there was a cold front moving in from—" "Eleanor," I said, "I need you to listen to me carefully." A brief pause. In 34 years, I had used that particular tone of voice perhaps a dozen times. She recognized it immediately. "I'm listening," she said. "I have Clara with me, and her daughter, my granddaughter. Her name is Lily. She's 4 months old." I kept my eyes on the road. In the back seat, Clara was holding Lily against her shoulder, staring out the window at the dark fields passing by. They've had a very difficult time. Lily needs formula prepared as soon as we arrive. Clara needs a warm bath, a meal, and a bed that does not require any explanation. Can you have all of that ready in 40 minutes? The pause this time was shorter. I can have it ready in 30, Eleanor said, and her voice had shifted into the register she used when she was already moving. Is there anything else medical? Should I call Dr. Patel? Not tonight. Tomorrow we'll talk about a full checkup for both of them. Tonight, they just need to be safe. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Clara had turned her head slightly toward the window, and I could see in the reflection of the passing headlights that her eyes were closed. Eleanor, she looks like she's been through something I don't have words for yet. I need you to be— I know how to take care of that girl, Eleanor said, and there was something in her voice that was not professional composure anymore. It was something older and fiercer than that. I've known how to take care of her since she was 4 days old, and you brought her home from the hospital and stood in the front hallway with her in your arms looking like you had absolutely no idea what you were supposed to do next. Despite everything, something loosened slightly in my chest. That hasn't changed as much as you might think, I said. Drive carefully, Mr. Sterling, she said. We'll be ready. She was. When the navigator turned through the iron gate at the end of the gravel drive and the motion sensor lights came on along the front path, I heard Clara make a sound, beside me not quite a word, more of a small, involuntary exhale. The sound a person made when they had been braced against the cold for so long that the first suggestion of warmth was almost painful. The house was lit from inside, warm yellow light pushing through the tall front windows into the darkness of the coastal night. Eleanor was standing on the front porch before I had the engine fully off. She was 61 years old, Eleanor Higgins, with close-cropped silver hair and the upright posture of a woman who had long ago decided that the world would have to work harder than that to make her stoop. She had worked for this family since she was 27 years old. She had helped me tie my tie on the morning of my wedding. She had sat with me in the hospital waiting room the night my wife's condition turned critical. She had held a 4-year-old Clara on her lap the afternoon we came home from the funeral, and explained as gently as anyone could explain such a thing that Mama was not coming back. When Clara stepped out of the car, Eleanor came down the porch steps at a pace that was faster than I had seen her move in years. She crossed the gravel drive and took Clara's face in both hands, the way you held something that had been lost and then found. And she looked at her for a long moment without speaking, her eyes moving across Clara's face with the careful, aching attention of someone cataloging damage. "My girl," Eleanor said, and her voice broke cleanly on the second word. "My girl, look at you." Clara made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "Hi, Eleanor," she said. Her voice was muffled because Eleanor had pulled her into an embrace that left no room for distance or composure or any of the careful containing that Clara had been doing for the past month. "I'm okay. I'm okay now." "You are absolutely not okay," Eleanor said firmly into Clara's hair. "But you will be. You absolutely will be. Let me see that baby." Lily transferred into Eleanor's arms, regarded this new person with the serious, unfocused attention of a 4-month-old who was trying to decide whether to cry about the development. Eleanor held her with the particular authority of a woman who had held many babies, one hand supporting the head, the other cradling the back, already making the small rocking motion that babies responded to before they were old enough to know why. "Hello, Lily," Eleanor said softly. "I am very glad you are here, both of you." She looked up at me over the baby's head. "Formula's on the stove. Guest suite on the east wing is ready. I made soup, the chicken and rice the way Clara always liked it." "Eleanor," Clara said. Her voice had gone rough again. "You didn't have to." "I know I didn't have to," Eleanor said briskly. "That's rather the point. Come inside, all of you. It's cold out here and this baby looks like she has opinions about that." Inside the house did what houses could do when they were properly cared for and properly lit. It received us. The front hallway smelled like wood smoke and the lemon oil Eleanor used on the oak floors, and the heat was on and the lights were warm, and somewhere from the kitchen came the smell of chicken broth and something baking. I had not been aware until that moment of how hungry I was, or how cold I had been since stepping out of the car in front of that concrete shell an hour ago. Eleanor took Clara and Lily directly to the kitchen, where the formula was already measured and warming in a pot of water on the stove. I hung my coat on the hook by the door and stood in the front hallway for a moment, listening. From the kitchen came the sound of Eleanor's voice, low and steady, talking Clara through the process of the formula preparation with the calm authority of someone who had opinions about water temperature and bottle sterilization and was not going to keep those opinions to herself. Clara responded in a voice that was quieter than her usual one, but steadier than it had been all evening. And Lily made the particular urgent sounds of a baby who could smell food approaching and was prepared to voice strong feelings about the timeline. And underneath all of it, underneath Eleanor's instructions and Clara's murmured responses, and Lily's increasingly pointed commentary on the speed of the proceedings, underneath all of it, the house was different than it had been this morning. I could feel it the way you could sometimes feel a change in air pressure before a storm. Something that had been missing was present again. Something that had been still was moving. I walked to the kitchen doorway and stood there. Clara was sitting at the island counter, Lily finally feeding from a warmed bottle in her arms, and the expression on my daughter's face was one I had not seen in longer than I wanted to calculate. It was not happiness, not exactly, not yet. It was something that came before happiness, the particular look of a person who has stopped waiting for the next bad thing and has allowed themselves just for this moment to simply be somewhere warm. I stayed in the doorway and did not say anything. Eleanor caught my eye from across the kitchen and gave me the smallest, most precise nod, the nod that meant she had this, that Clara was in good hands, that I could stand down for the next few minutes. I walked to the small study off the hallway and sat down in the chair behind the desk. I picked up my phone. I scrolled to Julian Belmont's number, and I looked at it for a long moment. The name, the contact photo, I had never deleted the Manhattan area code. Then I set the phone face down on the desk. Not yet. There was a sequence to this, and I had learned over 6 decades that the men who acted on rage in the first hour rarely achieved what they were actually after. What I was after was not a phone call. What I was after required planning evidence and the kind of patience that was very nearly indistinguishable from fury held at an extremely low temperature. I needed to know everything before I moved. And I was going to find out everything, every detail, every name, every decision that had been made in every room I had not been in. I picked up the phone again. Not Julian's number this time. My own private investigator's. It rang twice. "Mr. Sterling," said the voice on the other end. "It's late." "I know," I said. "I need you in Myrtle Cove by morning. Something has happened, and I need a man I trust on the ground before anyone else figures out that I know." A pause. "I'll be on the road in an hour," the voice said. "Good," I said. I looked through the open study door toward the warm light of the kitchen, where I could hear Eleanor telling Clara something that made Clara laugh, a short, surprised laugh, the kind that came out before a person remembered they were supposed to be too tired for it. "And one more thing. I need everything you can find on a man named Ray Morrow, former federal agent, now works private. Someone hired him recently, and I want to know who." I did not sleep that night. I sat in the study until 2 in the morning reviewing the financial documents my analyst had forwarded earlier in the week, then moved to the front sitting room and watched the darkness over the water until it began very gradually to become something other than darkness. By the time the sky had shifted from black to the particular deep gray that preceded a coastal dawn, I had gone through 2 pots of coffee and arrived at a state that was not quite alertness, but was close enough to function. At 6:15, I heard Lily. The guest suite where Clara was staying was at the far end of the east wing, and the walls of this house were solid, good construction, the kind they did not always bother with anymore. But a 4-month-old with something to say could make herself heard through solid construction without any difficulty at all. The sound traveled down the hallway and reached me in the sitting room, and I found myself on my feet before I had consciously decided to stand up. I walked to the east wing and knocked softly on the door. "Clara, do you need anything?" A brief pause, then her voice tired but functional. "We're okay, Dad. She's just hungry. I've got it." I stood outside the door for a moment longer than was strictly necessary, listening to the small sounds of Clara moving around the room, the particular cadence of a mother managing a feeding in the early morning. Then I went back to the kitchen and started a third pot of coffee, and by the time Eleanor arrived at 7 o'clock, with the particular purposeful energy she brought to every morning, I had also made toast that I had not eaten, and scrambled eggs that were sitting on a plate getting cold. "You didn't sleep," Eleanor said, looking at me the way she had been looking at me for 34 years. "I slept a little," I said. "You did not sleep at all," she said. "Sit down. I'll make fresh eggs." Clara appeared in the kitchen doorway at 7:30, carrying Lily against her left shoulder. She was wearing clothes that Eleanor must have found somewhere in the house, a soft gray sweater that had belonged to my wife, and that I had not been able to bring myself to donate, and a pair of dark pants that were slightly too long for her. She had showered. Her hair was clean and loose around her shoulders, and the sharpness of her cheekbones was still there. That was not something a single night was going to correct, but she was standing straighter. She looked like herself again, or at least like a version of herself that I recognized. "Good morning," she said. She looked at the cold eggs on my plate and the 3 coffee cups lined up on the counter, and arrived at the same conclusion Eleanor had. "You didn't sleep, did you?" "Sit down," I said. "Eleanor is making fresh eggs. I can see that," Clara said. She pulled out the stool across from me at the island counter and settled onto it, shifting Lily to a more comfortable position. Lily regarded me across the counter with the round, serious gaze of a baby who had not yet decided what she thought of this new environment, but was gathering data methodically. "She slept 4 hours in a row last night," Clara said. "First time since she was born. I think she could feel that the floor wasn't moving." "The floor wasn't moving?" I asked. "The building we were in. When the wind was strong, you could feel it in the concrete. Just slightly. Just enough that you couldn't fully relax." She said it the way she said most things about the past month, matter-of-factly, without editorializing the way a person described weather. She always slept better on calm nights. Eleanor set a plate of eggs in front of Clara without comment, then refilled my coffee without being asked, and then found a reason to be in the pantry on the far side of the kitchen, which was Eleanor's way of giving us the room without leaving it. I waited until Clara had eaten several bites. Then I said, "Tell me everything. From the beginning. I'm not going anywhere and I'm not going to interrupt you, and I need to understand all of it." Clara looked down at her plate. Then she looked up at me. "It's a lot, Dad." "I know," I said. "Start wherever feels right." She started with the wedding, which I already knew. Then she moved to the first months of marriage, which I thought I knew, but apparently did not, the subtle ways in which Julian's behavior changed once the ceremony was over, the gradual contraction of her world as the months passed. Phone calls with me that were always slightly shorter than they should have been. Plans with friends that were always slightly inconvenient. Nothing dramatic enough to name as a problem. Everything calibrated just below the threshold of something she could point to and say, "This is wrong." "He wasn't cruel," Clara said, and I could hear her working to be precise, to be fair, even now. "Not the way people picture it. He managed things. He managed me. Who I saw, what I knew about the business, what I thought was normal. By the time I was 6 months pregnant, I had stopped noticing how small everything had gotten." I kept my hands flat on the counter and did not say anything. She told me about the pregnancy and about the evening she had walked into Julian's home office looking for a phone charger and found on his second monitor a spreadsheet that she recognized as a financial report because she had a business degree and had worked in corporate finance before the marriage, and she knew what she was looking at. She knew within about 4 minutes that what she was looking at was not a legitimate financial report. The structure of it, multiple accounts, staggered transfers, descriptions that did not match the figures, was consistent with what was called layering, the second stage of a money laundering operation, in which funds were moved through a series of transactions to obscure their origin. Layering, I said. You're certain? I took 3 screenshots on my phone before I closed the window, Clara said. I was very careful. I closed the spreadsheet exactly the way I'd found it, and I went back to the bedroom, and I sat on the edge of the bed, and I thought about what to do for probably 2 hours. She paused. I decided I needed more before I did anything, so I started paying attention in a way I hadn't before. And the more I paid attention, the more I found. She found transaction records that referenced subsidiary companies she had never heard of. She found correspondence between Julian and 2 individuals whose names appeared nowhere on any official Belmont corporate documentation. She found in a filing cabinet in a storage room that she was quite sure Julian had forgotten she knew about a set of documents relating to the purchase of commercial property through a company called Coastal Meridian LLC. I set my coffee cup down. Coastal Meridian, I said. Clara looked at me. You know it. That's why I'm in Myrtle Cove, I said. That name came up in our own audit 3 weeks ago. I've been trying to trace it. I looked at my daughter across the kitchen island and felt something shift in my understanding of the situation. A reorientation. The way a picture changed when you stepped back far enough to see the frame. Clara, how long ago did you find those documents? About 6 weeks before Lily was born, she said. So roughly 5 months ago. 5 months. While I had been tracing Coastal Meridian through layers of corporate registration, my daughter had been living inside the source of it, gathering evidence with her bare hands. She continued. She told me about Lily's birth, which had been in a private hospital in Manhattan. Julian present. Victoria present, everyone performing the appropriate version of a family welcoming a new child. She told me about the days afterward, when Victoria's congratulations had a temperature to them that Clara now understood was the temperature of a woman who had wanted a grandson and received a granddaughter, and considered this a failure of execution. She told me about the gradual escalation of Victoria's behavior, the comments that were almost criticism, but not quite the household decisions that were made without consulting her, the way Julian began deferring to his mother on matters that had previously been between husband and wife. She wanted a reason to remove me, Clara said. And when Lily wasn't a boy, she decided I had given her enough of one. The sequence of events after that was methodical in a way that made my stomach tighten. Victoria and Julian had, over the course of approximately 2 weeks, quietly assembled what they needed. Clara's passport was moved from the drawer where she kept it to a location she could not find. Her primary bank account, the joint account she had opened with Julian after the wedding, was restructured so that she could no longer initiate transfers above $500 without a secondary authorization. Her phone was replaced with a new one that was, she eventually realized, being monitored. Under federal law, I said carefully, confiscating someone's passport and monitoring their communications without consent are both serious offenses. Identity document theft is a federal crime. Unauthorized electronic surveillance falls under the Electronic Communications Privacy Act of 1986. I said it not to lecture her, but because I needed to hear it out loud to name what had been done to her in the language it deserved. I know, Clara said quietly. I know what they did was illegal. I just didn't have any way to prove it or report it from inside that house. She told me about the night they took her. Julian had told her they were going to a medical appointment, a postpartum checkup he had scheduled on her behalf. She had brought Lily because she had not yet reached the point of leaving Lily with anyone in that household. The car had driven south instead of to the clinic, and when she asked where they were going, Julian had told her in a very quiet voice that she needed to understand that the situation had changed and that she had two choices about how to handle it. She had chosen the third option, which was not one he had offered her. She had not cooperated. She had not agreed to anything. And when they stopped at the outskirts of Myrtle Cove and Julian opened the car door, she had walked away from him without speaking, because there was nothing left to say to someone who had made that decision. The kitchen was very quiet when she finished. Eleanor had stopped moving around in the pantry. Lily had fallen asleep against Clara's shoulder, her small face slack and peaceful, unaware that she had spent the first 4 months of her life at the center of a situation that had required her mother to be considerably braver than most people were ever called upon to be. I looked at my daughter for a long moment. Then I said, "They think you have no recourse. They think they've constructed a situation where you can't come back from." "Yes," Clara said. "They're wrong," I said. Clara looked at me. And for the first time since I had found her at that checkout lane, something shifted in her expression. Not hope exactly, not yet, but the beginning of the architecture that hope was built on. "Dad," she said, "I don't want you to do anything that puts you at risk. They have resources, they have lawyers, they have—" "So do I," I said. I picked up my coffee cup. "The difference is that my lawyers are loyal, and after yesterday evening I have considerably more motivation than they are expecting." I looked at her steadily. "You said last night there was something in the bag, something you've been carrying since they brought you here." Clara's hand tightened slightly on Lily's back. "Not yet," she said, "but soon. There are a few more things I need to tell you first." She took a breath. "The property purchases. Coastal Meridian. Dad, that's not just a money laundering operation. There's something bigger underneath it. Something that involves Sterling Corp directly." I set the cup down very slowly. "Tell me," I said. He had delivered the news about my wife's prognosis with the careful precision of a man who respected his patients enough to tell them the truth. He had monitored my own health through the years of building Sterling Corp, told me more than once that stress was not a strategy. Advice I had acknowledged and mostly ignored. He was compact, methodical, late 50s with the manner of a physician who had delivered enough difficult news that he had developed a very precise relationship with words, using exactly as many as the situation required, and never one more. I called him Thursday evening after Clara went to bed. I told him I needed him in South Carolina Saturday morning to conduct a thorough examination of a 4-month-old infant. I told him to bring everything for a complete workup. I did not tell him why or who the infant was. The most useful information in my experience was the kind that arrived without the contamination of prior expectation. He arrived at 10, driving the sensible gray sedan he had owned as long as I had known him. Eleanor brought him to the sitting room where Clara was waiting with Lily. I introduced them simply, our family doctor 19 years, and Dr. Patel shook Clara's hand with the manner of a man who had already decided to ask no questions that were not strictly medical. The examination took 45 minutes. He was thorough in the way that good physicians were thorough, systematic, unhurried, never making a mother feel her questions were inconvenient. He checked weight-length reflexes, muscle tone, eyes, and ears. Then he listened to Lily's heart with a stethoscope for longer than Clara appeared to expect, repositioning it twice, his expression professionally neutral, in the way I recognized as the expression of a man who had heard something he wanted to verify before speaking. "She's a strong little girl," he said when he finished. "Her weight is on the low end of normal, which supplemental feeding will address. Development is on track, reflexes excellent." He paused. I'd like to do one additional test. An echocardiogram, a specialized ultrasound of the heart. Portable unit, 20 minutes, completely non-invasive. Lily won't feel anything. Clara's eyes sharpened immediately. Why? She asked. What did you hear? Something I'd like to look at more closely, Dr. Patel said. I may be looking at nothing at all, and I see no value in causing unnecessary worry. I will tell you everything I find. You have my word. Clara looked at me. I nodded. She turned back to the doctor. Let's do it. I left the room. The sitting room was small, and I would have been in the way, and some waiting was better done in motion. I walked to the kitchen window and stood there looking at the winter garden, without seeing it holding a glass of water I did not drink. Eleanor came in and stood beside me without speaking. After a while she said, "She's going to be fine." Not a question, not a platitude. Eleanor Higgins making a statement of intent on behalf of the universe. Yes, I said. She is. 20 minutes later, Dr. Patel appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked at me, then briefly toward the sitting room, then back at me. The sequence of glances was as legible as a sentence. He followed me into the hallway. The echocardiogram shows a small ventricular septal defect, he said. A VSD, a small opening in the wall between the two lower chambers of the heart. One of the most common congenital conditions. The majority of small defects close on their own and within the first year. However, this one is in a location and of a size that I would recommend monitoring with the option of a minimally invasive surgical procedure if it has not closed by the time Lily is 8 to 10 months old. Risk if it's not addressed, I asked. Increased strain on the heart over time. Not immediately life-threatening at this age, but not something to leave unmonitored. The procedure, if necessary, is routine. Excellent outcomes. He paused. This defect would not have been detectable on a standard newborn screening. It requires a dedicated cardiac ultrasound. There is no question of negligence. The hallway was very quiet. From behind the sitting room door, Lily was making small, satisfied sounds. She had apparently decided she was done being examined and had opinions about what should happen next. How long has she had it? I asked, though I already knew. She was born with it, Dr. Patel said. Born with it. During 31 days in a concrete building with open walls and damp cardboard on the floor, a heart working slightly harder than it should held by a mother who had no way of knowing and would have been destroyed by knowing. Is there a case for waiting before I tell Clara? I asked. She has been through significant trauma. She is not recovered. There is a difference between safe and well. Dr. Patel considered this carefully. There is a case for strategic timing, he said. Clara has an absolute right to this information, and I am not suggesting we withhold it indefinitely. But in my clinical judgment, telling her today, while she is still in acute recovery, is different from telling her in 2 weeks, when she has more resources to receive it constructively. He met my eyes. 2 weeks is the outer limit. No longer. 2 weeks, I said. I'll tell her myself. I watched him return to the sitting room, heard him speaking to Clara in the warm tones he used for good news. Lily's development, her strength, her resilience. Every word he said was true. He simply organized the truth in a particular order, and I was grateful for it in a way I did not know how to express. Eleanor was still at the kitchen window when I came back. Well, she said. I told her briefly, in the same spare language Dr. Patel had used. She listened with her hands flat on the counter, and when I finished, she said simply, "What do you need from me?" "Watch Lily," I said. "Feeding, sleep, any changes in color or breathing. I'm going to be managing several things at once, and I need someone with eyes on that baby who will call me immediately if anything changes." You know I will, she said. Through the kitchen window across the winter garden, I could see Clara through the glass doors of the sitting room move to the armchair Lily settled against her chest, both of them in a patch of pale winter sunlight. Clara was looking down at her daughter with an expression so purely and completely love that it was almost difficult to look at directly. She did not know yet. I picked up my phone and messaged Dr. Patel's office schedule Lily for cardiac follow-up in 2 weeks. Coordinate with Eleanor Higgins. Identify the best pediatric cardiac surgical team in the Northeast. I want names. Then a second message to my private investigator. Any update on Ray Morrow? The response came back in under a minute. Confirmed. Hired 6 weeks ago by an LLC registered to Victoria Belmont. He's been watching you since you landed in South Carolina. But here's the thing, Mr. Sterling, he hasn't filed a single report in the past 4 days. I read it twice. A man hired to watch me who had stopped reporting 4 days ago, which was approximately when I arrived in Myrtle Cove, approximately when everything had started to change. I typed back, find out where he is. Don't approach him, just find him. I was in the study going through the third set of Coastal Meridian transaction records when Eleanor knocked on the door at 8:30 in the evening and told me there was a man at the gate. He says his name is Ray Morrow, she said, standing in the doorway, with the particular expression she reserved for situations that did not fit neatly into her existing categories. He says he needs to speak with you. He says to tell you he used to work for the other side. I set down the document I was holding. Let him in, I said. Put him in the front sitting room. And Eleanor, don't mention this to Clara. She nodded once and withdrew. I took 2 minutes before going to meet him. I used those 2 minutes to lock the Coastal Meridian files in the desk drawer, to pour 2 glasses of water from the carafe on the side table. Not because I was being hospitable, but because it was useful to have something to hand a man when you first met him, since it gave you approximately 30 seconds to read him while his hands were occupied, and to think about what I already knew about Ray Morrow, which was the following: 51 years old, formerly a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Financial Crimes Unit, out of the Charlotte field office, terminated 11 years ago following an internal complaint he had filed against 2 senior agents he believed were interfering with a money laundering investigation for reasons that were not professional. The complaint had gone nowhere. His career had ended. He had spent the subsequent decade working as a licensed private investigator, primarily in the Carolinas and Virginia, with a reputation for being thorough, discreet, and expensive. 6 weeks ago, according to my investigator, he had been retained by an LLC connected to Victoria Belmont. I walked to the front sitting room. He was standing when I came in, which told me something. A man who sat down uninvited in someone else's house was either very comfortable or very entitled. Ray Morrow was neither. He was standing near the window with his hands at his sides, and he turned when I entered with the alertness of someone who had spent years in rooms where it mattered who came through the door first. He was not what I had pictured, though I could not have said precisely what I had pictured. He was somewhere in his early 50s, broad across the shoulders, in the way of a man who had once been in excellent physical condition and had maintained enough of it to still be formidable. His hair was dark, going gray at the temples, cut short. His face was the kind of face that had absorbed a significant amount of weather and experience, and had come out looking not beaten but settled, the face of a man who had decided at some point what he thought about the world and had not found sufficient reason to revise the opinion. He was wearing a plain, dark jacket over a collared shirt, no tie, and he was holding his car keys in his left hand, in the manner of a man who wanted it understood that he could leave at any time. I handed him one of the water glasses. He took it. "Mr. Morrow," I said. "Sit down." He sat. I sat across from him. "You were hired to watch me," I said. "Yes," he said. He did not dress it up or apologize for it. He said it the way a man stated a fact that was already established between them and did not require elaboration. I found that I respected this more than I would have respected an explanation. 6 weeks ago, I said, by Victoria Belmont, by an LLC that traces back to her, yes. I did my own research before I took the job. I prefer to know who I'm actually working for. He turned the water glass in his hand, not drinking from it. The brief was straightforward. Monitor your movements. Report your schedule, your contacts, any unusual activity. Standard surveillance work. And you filed reports for approximately 2 weeks, I said. Then you stopped. Something shifted in his expression, not guilt exactly, but something adjacent to it. The look of a man confronting the distance between what he had done and what he believed about himself. I stopped 4 days before you found your daughter, he said. I want to be precise about that. I did not stop because you found her. I stopped before that. Why? He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the coastal wind had picked up, and I could hear it moving through the pine trees along the edge of the property. Then Ray Morrow said, "Because I found her first." The sitting room was very still. I located her approximately 10 days after I began the surveillance, he said. I drove past the construction site twice before I confirmed she was there. He paused. She was feeding the baby by the light of a small flashlight. It was 41 degrees that night. I did not say anything. I kept my face exactly where it was and did not say anything. I filed a report that said I had found no indication of unusual activity in the Myrtle Cove area, Ray said. And then I sat in my car for about 2 hours, and then I drove back to my motel and I did not sleep. He looked at me directly. I've done a lot of things in my career that required me to make peace with a certain amount of moral ambiguity. Surveillance work is not clean work. But I have never in my career filed a false report to conceal the location of a woman and an infant living in an open concrete structure in 41-degree weather. He set the water glass down on the side table. So I stopped filing reports, and I waited. Waited for what? I asked. For someone to come, he said simply. For someone who should have been looking for her to actually show up and look. He met my eyes. It took another 10 days. I was beginning to wonder if I was going to have to do something more direct. I looked at him for a long moment. Ray Morrow looked back at me with the steadiness of a man who had already decided what this conversation was going to cost him, and had concluded that it was worth paying. There was no performance in him, no effort to make himself sympathetic. He was presenting me with what he had done and what he had not done, and leaving me to form my own conclusions. You have files on Victoria Belmont, I said. It was not a question. I have 11 years of files on the Belmont financial operation, he said. I built them in my own time with my own resources beginning approximately 3 months after I left the Bureau. The investigation I flagged internally, the one that ended my career, was a Belmont-adjacent case. I was never able to prove the connection definitively, but I believed it then, and I believe it now. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a USB drive, which he set on the table between us without ceremony. This is a copy. The original is in a safety deposit box at a bank in Charlotte, and a second copy is with an attorney I trust with instructions to contact the United States Attorney's Office for the Western District of North Carolina if anything happens to me. I looked at the USB drive. Then I looked at him. You've been building a case against them for 11 years, I said. I've been waiting for a situation where the case could be used, he said. Evidence gathered by a private individual without a warrant is not admissible in federal criminal proceedings. What it can do is point federal investigators toward the places they need to look so that they can gather their own evidence through proper legal channels. He paused. I need someone with the standing and the resources to put this in front of the right people. Someone who has a direct personal interest in seeing it through. He looked at me evenly. I believe that's you, Mr. Sterling. I reached out and picked up the USB drive. It was lighter than it had any right to be given what it apparently contained. 11 years of one man's determination to hold on to something true in the absence of any institutional support for doing so. I understood that kind of determination. I had built a company on it. I'll need to verify everything on this before I move on it, I said. I have people who can do that quickly and discreetly. I'd expect nothing less, he said. And you understand that if this goes where I intend it to go, you will be required to cooperate fully with federal investigators. Everything you know, every source, every method. That's why I'm here, Ray said. I stood up. He stood up. We did not shake hands yet. That would come later after I had verified what was on the drive, after I knew whether Ray Morrow was exactly what he appeared to be, or something more complicated. But I looked at him across the sitting room of this house that had been too quiet for too long, and I said, "You let her stay in that building for 10 days after you found her." He did not flinch. "Yes," he said, "I did." "We'll come back to that," I said. "I know," he said. "I expect we will." I did not open the USB drive that night, not because I was afraid of what was on it, but because I had learned over 40 years of making consequential decisions that the worst time to absorb critical information was when your hands were still warm from holding it for the first time. I needed distance between Ray Morrow's visit and the moment I put that drive into a computer. I needed the part of my mind that processed data, not the part that was still sitting with the image of a flashlight beam in a concrete building and the number 41 degrees. I went to bed at 11. I lay in the dark listening to the house. The wind outside, the occasional sound of Lily stirring in the east wing, Eleanor moving through the hallway on her nightly check. At 2:30 in the morning, I accepted that sleep was not coming and went back to the study. I plugged the drive into my laptop. Ray Morrow was whatever else, he was a meticulous man. 11 folders each labeled by year. Within each folder, financial records, correspondence, corporate registration documents, surveillance logs, and a section labeled simply Notes. Ray's own analysis, written in the spare language of a man who had spent years separating what he had observed from what he had concluded. I started with the current year and worked backward. By 4 in the morning, I understood the architecture of what the Belmont family had been building for at least 7 years. By 5, I was on the phone with Marcus Webb, my chief financial analyst in New York, who answered on the second ring because Marcus Webb kept his phone on his nightstand and answered regardless of the hour, which was precisely why I paid him what I paid him. Pull every SSIEC filing related to Sterling Corp over the past 24 months, I said, without preamble. Any entity that has acquired more than 0.5% of our outstanding shares during that period, I want the full ownership chain. Every subsidiary, every holding company, every registered agent, all the way to the actual human beings at the end of the line. That's going to take a few hours, Marcus said. Start now, I said. Call me when you have something. He called at 8:47. His voice had taken on the particular taut quality of a man who had found something significant and was working hard to stay calm about it. I need to walk you through what I found, he said, because I want to make sure I'm reading it correctly before I characterize it. What Marcus had found cross-referenced with Ray's files was irrefutable. A pattern of share acquisition in Sterling Corp beginning 18 months ago, approximately 4 months before Julian Belmont and Clara were married. 14 separate entities, limited liability companies, investment trusts, 2 offshore funds registered in the Cayman Islands. Each entity had acquired shares in amounts calibrated to remain below the 5% threshold that triggered mandatory disclosure requirements, under Section 13 of the Securities Exchange Act of 1934. Below that threshold, an acquirer could build a significant ownership position without filing a public notice with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Individually, each acquisition was invisible. Collectively, the Belmont-connected interests had accumulated 11.3% of Sterling Corp's outstanding shares. They need 30% for a blocking position, Marcus said. 51 for effective control. 11% is the beginning of one. How long to 30% at the current pace? I asked. Approximately 14 months. I sat with that. 14 months. Just over a year from now if nothing changed. The structuring keeping each entity below 5%, does that constitute a violation? I asked. If the entities are coordinated, Marcus said carefully, then collectively they may be violating Section 13D of the Exchange Act, which requires disclosure when a group acting in concert exceeds 5%. Proving coordination is the challenge. The SSEC would need a direct link between the entities. Ray Morrow's files establish that link, I said. 11 years of documentation. Marcus was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then you need to be talking to securities regulators, he said. I thanked him and ended the call. Then I stood and walked to the window. The morning was clear and cold outside, the kind of coastal morning that had no patience for ambiguity. In the garden, Eleanor was on the back porch holding Lily up to face the winter light. Lily was doing what she did with everything regarding it, with the serious, evaluating attention of someone who intended to form a considered opinion before committing to a reaction. They were just standing there in the ordinary morning. Eleanor and this small person who had spent her first 4 months in conditions that should have been impossible to survive, and something about the sight of them focused everything I had been carrying since 2:30 in the morning into a single cold point of clarity. The Belmont family had not stumbled into a relationship with my daughter. They had engineered it. The marriage had been a mechanism, a way to gain information about Sterling Corp's internal operations, and eventually to facilitate a takeover that could not have been achieved through legitimate means. Clara had not married into a family. She had been walked into a corporate acquisition strategy while believing she was building a life. I picked up my phone and called Ray. "I've verified the share acquisition pattern," I said. "Your files are consistent with what my analyst found. I need you to contact the FBI directly, not through me independently, as a private citizen, with information relevant to a federal securities violation and a money laundering investigation. Your prior service gives you a credibility I don't have." "I have a contact in the Charlotte field office," Ray said. "A current agent. Use it today," I said. "The Belmonts will notice soon that your reports have stopped, and I want federal attention on this before they understand what that means." After I hung up, I pulled out a legal pad and wrote down 3 names in a column on the left side of the page. Victoria Belmont, Julian Belmont, Martin Cole, whose name had appeared twice in Ray's files in contexts I had not yet fully processed, but that were going to require a very direct conversation in the very near future. I drew a line down the center of the page. On the right side, I wrote what they thought they were taking. Below that, a second line. Below the second line, 1 word. Me. The Sterling Corp regional office in Charleston was 40 minutes from the coastal property, and I made the drive on Friday morning with Ray Morrow's verified files on a secure laptop in the passenger seat and 20 years of professional history sitting somewhere in my chest like a stone I had not yet decided what to do with. Martin Cole had been Sterling Corp's chief legal counsel since the company was small enough that his salary represented a meaningful percentage of our annual operating costs. He had been 34 years old when I hired him, sharp, thorough, recommended by a colleague whose judgment I had trusted completely. Over 2 decades, he had handled every significant legal matter Sterling Corp had faced. He had called me at midnight before a particularly difficult acquisition to talk through the risk analysis. I had attended his daughter's college graduation. His wife had sent flowers when my wife died. I had not in 20 years had a single reason to doubt him. I had called him Thursday evening and asked him to meet me at 9 Friday morning, telling him only that I needed to review documentation related to Clara's marriage contract. His voice on the phone was easy and professional, the voice of a man with no reason to be alarmed. I listened to that ease carefully and said nothing that would alter it. He was already in the conference room when I arrived, silver-haired, polished leather portfolio open on the table, coffee in hand. He stood when I walked in and extended his hand with the automatic warmth of long familiarity. "Richard, good to see you. I pulled the Belmont prenuptial agreement last night. There's not much there that helps Clara, I'm afraid. The terms were fairly standard and she signed." "Sit down, Martin," I said. Something in my voice reached him immediately. The extended hand dropped. He sat. The professional ease in his face became something more careful, the expression of a man who had just registered a change in the weather and was recalculating quickly. I opened the laptop and turned it to face him. On the screen was a wire transfer record from 3 years ago, $470,000 routing through a Delaware LLC to a private account in Martin Cole's name at a bank in the Cayman Islands. 6 similar transfers over 18 months. Slightly under $3 million total. Martin looked at the screen for a long time. What I saw in his face was not the confusion or outrage of a wrongly accused man. It was the very specific expression of someone doing rapid calculations about what was already known and what might still be concealed. "This is going to need some context," he said, his voice measured. "I'd like to hear it," I said. What followed was 7 minutes of the most fluent misdirection I had encountered in a long career of encountering it. He described the transfers as personal consulting fees, entirely separate from his role at Sterling Corp, using words like compartmentalization and technical compliance with the ease of a man who had been rehearsing this explanation for years. His hands stayed still. His voice stayed level. He maintained eye contact throughout, which was either the behavior of an innocent man or of a very experienced attorney who knew that maintaining eye contact was what innocent men did. When he finished, I said, "The prenuptial agreement you drafted for Clara, the clause governing asset protection in the event of marital dissolution, the one that would have entitled her to independent legal representation and a mandatory waiting period before any asset transfer. Walk me through why that clause was removed from the final version she signed." The eye contact broke. Just a fraction of a second, the briefest downward movement before he brought it back up. But in 30 years of watching people across tables, I had learned that a fraction of a second was sometimes all you needed. "That clause was removed at the client's request," he said. "Julian Belmont's legal team indicated." "Julian Belmont was not your client," I said. My voice was quiet, and I kept it quiet deliberately because quiet carried further than raised, and I needed every word to land precisely. "Clara was your client. My daughter was your client. You were retained by this family to protect her interests, not to accommodate the preferences of her husband's legal team. Richard, the situation was more nuanced than... The situation," I said, "is that my daughter spent 31 days in an unfinished building with her 4-month-old infant because the legal protections you were paid to put in place for her were removed from the document she signed. And the records in front of me suggest that removal was not an oversight." I closed the laptop. "There's a board meeting in this office at 2 o'clock this afternoon. I'd like you to be there." His face went carefully neutral, the professional mask snapping back into place. "Of course. he said. "I'll be there." He walked to the door with the measured pace of a man who understood that walking too quickly would communicate something he did not want to communicate. At the door, he paused without turning around. "Whatever you think you've found," he said, "I would encourage you to consider the full picture before you act on it." "I always consider the full picture," I said. "That's rather the problem for you." The board meeting at 2 o'clock was attended by 7 directors, 3 senior executives, and Martin Cole, who sat at the far end of the table with the stillness of a man who had decided stillness was his best available option. I presented the evidence in the order that told the clearest story: the share acquisition pattern, the coordination documents from Ray's files, the transfer records connecting Martin to Belmont-affiliated accounts, and finally, the comparative analysis of Clara's original prenuptial draft against the version she had signed with the removed protective clauses highlighted in red. No one spoke for several seconds when I finished. Then Patricia Henshaw, the board's longest-serving independent director. 70 years old, a career in corporate governance. The manner of someone who had witnessed institutional failures of every conceivable variety, said in a very quiet voice, "Martin, do you have anything to say to this board?" Martin Cole sat at the end of the table for 3 full seconds. "I would like to consult with personal counsel before making any further statements," he said. Technically, exactly the right thing to say. In the context of a room that had just listened to 20 minutes of documentary evidence, the most damning possible response. "That's your right," I said. "And as of this moment, it's also your only remaining role in this company." I looked at Patricia Henshaw. "I'd like to call a vote on the immediate suspension of Mr. Cole's engagement as chief legal counsel pending a full investigation." 7-0. Martin Cole stood, collected his portfolio and his coffee cup, and walked to the door. At the threshold, he looked back, not at the board, at me specifically, and I held his gaze until he looked away first. Then he walked into the hallway and through the glass wall of the conference room. I watched him pull out his phone and dial before he had taken 3 steps. "Someone follow him," I said quietly to the security director near the door. "Note who he calls. Do not approach him." The security director stepped out. Patricia Henshaw looked at me across the table. "How deep does this go?" "Deep enough," I said, "but not deeper than we can handle." I closed my laptop. "I'll need the board's support for the next several weeks. Some of the steps ahead are going to attract attention." "You'll have it," she said. Around the table, every head nodded. I thanked them and walked out into the corridor, where the afternoon light came through the tall windows at the end of the hall, and Martin Cole was nowhere to be seen. I stood there for a moment, with the particular weight of 20 years pressing down on the afternoon, and then I pulled out my phone and called Ray Morrow. "Cole has been suspended," I said when he answered. "He's making calls. I need your FBI contact to move faster than planned." "Already in motion," Ray said. "My contact in Charlotte filed a preliminary inquiry with the Financial Crimes Unit this morning. They're interested." "Good," I said. The elevator doors opened in front of me. Then we're on schedule. I was back at the house by 7. Eleanor had kept dinner warm: roasted chicken and potatoes, the kind of meal that asks nothing of you except that you sit down and eat it. Clara was at the kitchen island when I walked in, Lily asleep in the portable bassinet Eleanor had set up near the window. Clara looked at my face the way she had always looked at my face when I came home from something difficult, reading it, the way a person read weather, noting what was present and what was being contained. "How did it go?" she asked. "The way it needed to," I said. I hung up my coat and sat down across from her. "Martin Cole has been suspended from Sterling Corp. Pending a full investigation." The board voted unanimously. Clara was quiet for a moment. "Martin," she said. The word carried something complicated in it, not surprise, but the particular weight of a betrayal that had been suspected and was now confirmed. He's known our family since I was in high school. I know, I said. She looked down at her hands on the counter. Then she stood up and walked to the pantry, and when she came back, she was carrying the canvas bag, the same worn, faded bag she had refused to leave behind in that concrete building, the same bag she had held against her chest in the back seat of the Navigator on the drive to the house. She set it on the counter between us without ceremony and looked at me. "It's time, Dad," she said. She reached inside and moved past the folded onesie and the small Ziploc bag of crackers that she still had not thrown away. I noticed she had not thrown it away, and I understood why, because some habits formed under scarcity did not release themselves overnight. Her hand found what it was looking for at the very bottom of the bag, wrapped in a plastic grocery sack tied at the top. She unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a phone, small, cheap, the kind that came on a prepaid plan and cost less than $30 at a gas station convenience store. "I bought it the week before everything happened," Clara said. "I had been finding things for about 2 months. By then, the financial records, the shell companies, the coastal Meridian property purchases. I knew something was wrong. I knew it was going to come to a head, and I knew that when it did, no one was going to believe me without proof." Her voice was steady and clear, the voice of a woman who had rehearsed this explanation, not to perform it, but to be sure she could get through it without breaking. "So I bought this phone with cash at a gas station in Westchester, registered a cloud account under a name that wasn't mine, and I waited." "For what?" I asked, though I was already beginning to understand. "For them to say it out loud," she said. She powered on the phone. It took a moment to connect, and then she opened the cloud application and navigated to a single audio file. The file was 43 minutes long. She looked at me before she pressed play. She pressed play. The kitchen filled with sound, the ambient noise of a large room, the particular acoustic quality of a high-ceilinged space, and then 2 voices that were immediately recognizable. Victoria Belmont's voice was unhurried and precise, the voice of a woman who had never in her adult life needed to raise it to be obeyed. Julian's voice was quieter, more hesitant, the voice of a man taking instruction rather than participating in a conversation. I sat and I listened. I will not recount every word of what was on that recording, because some of it belonged to Clara in ways that were not mine to repeat, and some of it was the kind of thing that once heard settled into a person permanently and did not require repetition. What I will say is that within the first 8 minutes, Victoria Belmont had named the problem Clara knew too much and had demonstrated through 2 months of quiet behavior that Victoria had apparently been monitoring, that she intended to do something with what she knew. Within the first 15 minutes, Julian had agreed in his own hesitant and deferring way with his mother's assessment of the solution. Within the first 23 minutes, the specific plan had been discussed in sufficient detail that no subsequent attorney would be able to characterize what was on that recording as ambiguous. When the file ended, the kitchen was very quiet. Clara reached over and stopped the application. She set the phone on the counter between us and looked at me with the expression of someone who had been carrying a 43-minute recording in a plastic grocery bag at the bottom of a canvas tote for 6 weeks and had just for the first time set it down. "Clara," I said. My voice came out lower than I intended. I stopped, tried again. "You were 9 months pregnant. You stood in that hallway for 43 minutes recording that conversation because you knew you were going to need it." "I knew no one would believe me without it," she said simply. "You know how these families work, Dad. You know what money can do to a story." I did know. I had spent 40 years watching money reshape stories, soften edges, create alternative narratives that were just plausible enough to survive scrutiny. I knew exactly what the Belmont family's legal team would have done with Clara's account if she had arrived at my door with nothing but her own words. I reached across the counter, and I took my daughter's hands in both of mine. Her hands were cold, the way they always got when she was holding something in, and I held them until they were less cold, and she looked at me across the kitchen island with her eyes very bright and her chin very steady. "This goes to Ray's FBI contact," I said, "directly, tomorrow morning." "I know," she said, "combined with what Ray has, with what Marcus found in the SEC filings, with what we established today with Martin Cole." I paused. "Clara, this is the piece that makes it complete. Everything else we had was financial. This is their own voices, their own words." Her chin moved a small nod, just barely. "I know," she said again. And then very quietly she said, "I just needed to give it to you. I needed it to not only be mine anymore." I tightened my hands around hers. We stayed like that for a while, the kitchen warm around us, Lily breathing in the bassinet by the window, the coastal wind moving outside in the dark. And somewhere in the quiet of that moment, I understood something I had been circling for weeks without being able to name it. My daughter had not survived what she survived because of luck. She had survived it because she was in every way that mattered precisely the person her mother and I had tried to raise, someone who thought clearly under pressure, who planned when others panicked, who held on to the one thing that mattered when everything else was taken from her. I was not only proud of her, I was in awe of her. "Tomorrow," I said. "Tomorrow," she agreed. I called Patricia Walsh at 7:30 Saturday morning, before I had finished my first cup of coffee, and before I had allowed myself to think too carefully about whether this was the right move, because I had learned over the years that the calls you thought too carefully about were often the ones you never made. She picked up on the second ring. "Richard Sterling," she said, and her voice carried the particular quality of a woman who had been in politics for 30 years and had developed the ability to sound both unsurprised and completely alert at any hour. "It has been a long time." "It has," I said. "Patricia, I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to answer me the same way." A brief pause. "Go ahead." "Victoria Belmont," I said. "What happened in 2019? The silence that followed was 3 seconds long. In a conversation with Patricia Walsh, 3 seconds was a very long time. "Where are you?" she said. "South Carolina." "I can be there by noon," she said. "Don't say anything else on this line." She arrived at 11:58, which told me she had been moving before we hung up. She was 65 years old, Senator Patricia Walsh, with close-cropped silver hair and the upright posture of a woman who had spent 3 decades in rooms where posture communicated everything. She wore a plain gray suit and carried a single leather briefcase, and she walked through the front door of the house with the manner of someone who had decided on the drive down exactly what she was willing to say and what she was not. We sat in the study. I gave her coffee. She took it without thanking me, which was not rudeness. It was efficiency, the habit of a woman who did not spend words on transactions when there were more important things to say. I told her everything. The Coastal Meridian connection, the share acquisition pattern, Martin Cole, Clara's recording. I laid it out in the same order I had presented it to the board, because it was the order that told the clearest story, and Patricia Walsh was the kind of person who responded to clarity. When I finished, she set her coffee cup down and looked at me. "In 2019, she said, I was the ranking member of the Senate Banking Committee. We were conducting a preliminary review of irregularities in commercial real estate financing along the eastern seaboard, nothing public, yet still in the internal fact-finding stage." She paused. "Victoria Belmont contacted my chief of staff. She provided certain information. Personal information relating to a matter in my family that I had worked very hard to keep private, and she made it clear that this information would remain private as long as the banking committee's review did not extend to certain Belmont-adjacent financial entities. The room was very still. "I shut down that line of inquiry," Patricia said. Her voice was level, but underneath the levelness was something that had been living in a specific place for 6 years and had not diminished with time. I told myself it was a judgment call, that the information we had was insufficient anyway, that there were other priorities. She looked at me directly. "I have told myself that story for 6 years, Richard. I am very tired of it." I looked at her across the study desk. Patricia Walsh had been a formidable legislator, a careful politician, and by most accounts, a person of genuine principle, which was precisely why Victoria Belmont had chosen her as a target. Principled people had more to lose. "The recording Clara made," I said, "combined with Ray Morrow's 11 years of documentation and Marcus Webb's SEC analysis, is that sufficient for the Senate Judiciary Committee to request a formal referral to the Department of Justice?" "It is more than sufficient," Patricia said, "but I want to be clear about something." She leaned forward slightly. "If I do this, I am doing it through proper channels with full disclosure of my prior contact with the Belmont family. I will not sanitize my own involvement to make this cleaner for myself. Whatever comes out, comes out." "I wouldn't have it any other way," I said. She nodded once, the nod of a woman closing a door on 6 years of something she should have done differently. "Give me 72 hours, she said. "I need to make 3 calls and brief my legal counsel. After that, the Department of Justice takes the wheel, and neither of us controls the speed." "Understood," I said. She stood. I stood. She looked around the study briefly at the legal pads on the desk, at the coffee cups, at the closed door, behind which the rest of the house was quietly going about the business of 2 women and an infant learning to feel safe again. "Your daughter," she said. "Is she here?" "She is," I said. Patricia Walsh nodded slowly. "Good," she said, and the word carried something in it that was not entirely professional. Something older and more personal than that, the response of a woman who understood from her own particular experience what it meant to have someone in your corner when the people who should have been protecting you had chosen not to. She picked up her briefcase and walked to the door. 72 hours, Richard," she said without turning around. "I'll be here," I said. Ray Morrow came to the house on Tuesday evening carrying a copy of the New York Social Register and the particular expression of a man delivering information he already knew was going to change the temperature of the room. He set the publication on the kitchen island without comment and pointed to a quarter-page announcement near the back. I read it standing up. The Belmont Family Charitable Foundation was hosting its annual gala at the Plaza Hotel in Manhattan, 10 days from Saturday. The announcement described the evening as a celebration of resilience and new beginnings. At the bottom in smaller text, it noted that the event would include a personal statement from Julian Belmont regarding recent changes in his family circumstances, followed by a special announcement regarding his future. I set the publication down. "They're going to do it publicly," I said. "Announce Clara's death, introduce the new fiancé all in one evening. In front of 400 people and 3 society journalists," Ray said. "Clean, efficient, maximum social legitimacy. Once it's in print, the story becomes the record." He paused. "We have 10 days. I was about to respond when I heard Clara's voice behind me. "I know what I want to do," she said. I turned around. She was standing in the kitchen doorway, Lily against her shoulder, her expression carrying the particular steadiness of someone who had already made a decision and was now simply announcing it. She had heard everything. I could tell from her face that she had been standing there long enough to hear all of it. "Clara," I started. I want to walk into that room myself, Dad. Her voice was quiet and absolutely certain. I want to be there when Julian makes that announcement. I want the people in that room, the journalists, the board members, the family friends who have been told I'm gone. I want all of them to see me standing there with Lily in my arms. She met my eyes across the kitchen. They built a story about my disappearance. I want to be the one who ends it. Ray looked at me. I looked at Clara. It's a controlled environment, I said carefully. 400 people, private security, a guest list we are not on. You can get us on it, Clara said. It was not a question. She was right, and she knew she was right, which was why she had said it that way. I had attended that gala 3 times in the past decade. I knew the event organizer personally. Getting 2 names added to the list was well within the range of what a single phone call could accomplish. The risk, I said, is that Victoria sees you before you reach the main room. If she has security pull you out before Julian makes his statement, you lose the moment. Then we time it carefully, Clara said. We arrive late, after he's already at the microphone. She shifted Lily to her other shoulder, and the movement was so practiced, so automatic, that it underscored everything she was saying. This was a woman who had spent the past month making careful, precise decisions under pressure, and she had not lost the ability simply because she was now somewhere safe. I've been invisible for 6 weeks because they made me invisible. I am not going to let someone else decide when I become visible again. The kitchen was quiet for a moment. Ray Morrow was looking at the floor with the expression of a man who had formed an opinion and had decided this was not his conversation to enter. I looked at my daughter. I looked at the certainty in her face and the steadiness in her hands, and the child she was holding with the confidence of someone who had protected that child through circumstances that would have broken most people. We do it your way, I said. Something shifted in Clara's expression, not relief, because she had not been uncertain. Something more like recognition, the look of a woman who had needed to know that her father saw her clearly and now knew that he did. I turned to Ray. Change of plans, I said. We need a security detail for Clara and entry strategy, and we need it coordinated with whatever Walsh's team has on the federal side. If the Department of Justice is moving, I want their timeline aligned with ours. Ray nodded slowly. I'll make some calls. Tonight, I said. Tonight, he agreed. After Ray left, I stood at the kitchen window for a long moment, looking out at the dark coastal garden. 10 days. Everything we had built over the past 2 weeks. The FBI inquiry, Walsh's referral, the SEC documentation, Clara's recording, all of it, was moving toward a single point on a single evening in a ballroom at the Plaza Hotel. I thought about Martin Cole, who was somewhere in New York right now talking to personal counsel. I thought about Victoria Belmont, who was presumably reviewing seating charts and approving floral arrangements, and believing with the absolute confidence of a woman who had never once been held accountable for anything that she had already won. I picked up my phone and sent a single text message to Patricia Walsh. Timeline has moved. Need DOJ coordination within 10 days. Details to follow. Her response came back in under a minute. Understood. We're ready. The days between the announcement and the gala had a particular quality that I had not anticipated. Not the grinding tension I had expected, but something more layered than that, more complicated, and in ways I had not been prepared for, more precious. The work continued in parallel. Ray coordinated with his FBI contact in Charlotte, who was now in direct communication with the Department of Justice field office in New York. Walsh's team transmitted the formal referral package on Thursday, 48 hours ahead of her promised 72. Marcus Webb spent 2 days preparing a supplementary financial analysis for the federal investigators. These things happened in the background in phone calls and encrypted messages, and the kind of careful, methodical preparation that looked from the outside like nothing at all. But inside the house, something else was happening. On Wednesday morning, I found Clara in the kitchen, teaching Eleanor how to make the lemon ricotta pancakes that my wife had made every Sunday when Clara was small. I stood in the doorway, watching Eleanor write the recipe down in her neat, careful handwriting, while Clara moved around the kitchen with a confidence she had not had 2 weeks ago, reaching for things without hesitating, taking up space without apologizing for it. Lily was in the bouncer seat on the counter watching the proceedings with the focused attention of a 4-month-old who suspected something interesting was happening and intended to be part of it. I did not go in. I stood in the doorway for a moment and then walked back to the study, and the feeling I carried with me was not one I had a precise name for. It was something between gratitude and grief. The particular ache of recognizing a moment as it was happening rather than only afterward. On Thursday evening, Clara brought Lily to the study while I was reviewing the security arrangements Ray had put in place for the gala. She sat in the chair across from my desk without asking and settled Lily against her knee, and we talked. Not about the gala, not about the Belmonts, but about her mother. About the summer we had spent on Cape Cod when Clara was 9 and had decided with absolute conviction that she was going to be a marine biologist. About the way her mother had encouraged every version of that conviction without ever once suggesting it might change. She would have been so angry, Clara said, meaning her mother, about all of it. She would have been surgical about it, I said. Your mother was never angry in a way that wasn't useful. Clara smiled at that, a real smile, the kind that reached her eyes. I got that from her, she said. I know, I said. I've been watching you for 2 weeks. On Friday afternoon, I sat in the garden with Lily, while Clara slept the first full afternoon of sleep she had allowed herself since coming home. Lily lay on a blanket on the grass, wrapped in the yellow fleece suit Eleanor had produced from somewhere, examining the pale winter sky with her characteristic seriousness. I sat in the garden chair beside her and watched her the way I had once watched Clara, learning her face, memorizing the particular way she held her hands, noting every small change that accumulated into what she was becoming. I thought about Dr. Patel's report. 1 week remained before his 2-week limit, before I had promised to tell Clara about Lily's heart. The surgical consultation was already scheduled at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia for the week after the gala. The team Dr. Patel had recommended had a 96% success rate with this procedure. The numbers were good. The numbers were very good. I picked up my phone and sent a message to Dr. Patel. Consultation confirmed for the 22nd. I will speak with Clara before then. Then I looked back at Lily. She had found her own hand and was examining it with the absorbed concentration of a scientist who had just discovered something remarkable. You are going to be fine, I told her. The coastal wind moved through the winter grass around us. Both of you are going to be fine. That evening I called Ray. Security detail is confirmed, he said. 3 people. Clara will have coverage from the moment she enters the plaza until she is back in the car. The DOJ team will have 2 agents in the room, not visible, not announced. They will move when they move. He paused. Mr. Sterling, your daughter, she is sure about this. She is the most certain person in this house, I said. And that is saying something. Ray was quiet for a moment. Then we're ready, he said. I stood at the front door of the house after I hung up, looking out at the coastal night. Inside, I could hear Eleanor and Clara talking in the kitchen, their voices overlapping in the easy rhythm of 2 people who had found their way to genuine comfort with each other. Lily made a sound that was almost a word. 9 days. 8. 7. The gala was coming and we were ready, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, ready felt like enough. I could not tell you exactly what time it was when I gave up on sleep and walked out to the front porch. Late enough that the coastal road was empty and the only light came from the stars and the distant glow of the town. Cold enough that my breath made small clouds in the darkness. I stood at the porch railing with my hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had gone cold 10 minutes ago, and I looked out at the water, which was invisible in the dark but present in the sound. It made a steady, unhurried rhythm that had been there long before any of this and would be there long after. I heard the door open behind me. Clara stepped out, wrapped in the heavy blanket she had taken to carrying around the house in the evenings, a habit that had started in the first week and that I had said nothing about, because some habits formed in the cold needed time to release on their own schedule. She came to stand beside me at the railing, close enough that her shoulder was almost touching mine, and she looked out at the same darkness I was looking at. "You couldn't sleep either," she said. It was not a question. "No," I said. We stood there for a while without speaking, and it was not the uncomfortable silence of two people who had run out of things to say, but the comfortable silence of two people who were saying something without words, which was a thing that took a long time to build between people, and that I had not fully appreciated until I was standing in it. "Dad," Clara said finally, "I need to ask you something." "Ask," I said. She turned to look at me, and in the dim light from the hallway window, her face was serious in the way it had been serious when she was 12 years old, and had come to me with something that had been weighing on her for longer than she should have carried it alone. "Are you doing all of this for me?" she said. "Or are you doing some of it for yourself, because they came after your company too, and I need to know the difference?" I looked at her a long moment. It was a precise question, the kind that deserved a precise answer, and I had learned from her mother that Clara could always tell the difference between a careful truth and a comfortable one. "Both," I said, "but not in equal parts." I set the cold coffee mug on the railing and turned to face her properly. "What they did to Sterling Corp made me angry. What they did to Martin Cole made me feel foolish. But what they did to you and Lily—" I stopped, started again. "When I walked into that grocery store and I saw you standing at that register, I felt something I have not felt since the night your mother's condition turned critical, like the floor had gone out from underneath me." I looked at her steadily. "Everything else, the company, the shares Cole, the gala, all of it is in service of making sure no one ever puts that floor out from underneath you again. That is the only thing I am actually doing this for." Clara's eyes were very bright. She did not look away. "I've been scared," she said quietly. "Not about tomorrow. About you. About what it costs you to carry all of this and whether you're telling me you're fine because you need to or because you actually are." I reached out and put my hand on her shoulder, and she leaned into it the way she had leaned into things her whole life fully, without reservation. The way a person leaned when they trusted completely that the thing they were leaning on would hold. "I am not fine," I said. "I have not been fine since October when I started to suspect something was wrong and I could not reach you. I have been running on coffee and anger and the particular stubbornness that your grandfather always said was the worst thing about me and the only thing worth keeping." I paused. "But I am here, and tomorrow we finish it. And after tomorrow I intend to be considerably more fine than I have been in some time." Clara made a sound that was partway between a laugh and something that was not a laugh, and she wrapped her arms around me with the blanket still around her shoulders, and I held on to my daughter in the cold night air of a South Carolina December, the same way I had held her in a hospital room in Manhattan 31 years ago, like she was the most important thing I had ever been trusted with, like letting go was not something I was prepared to practice. I'm scared too, I said into her hair. I want you to know that. You asked me to be honest, and that is the honest answer. Thank you, she said very quietly. Tomorrow, I said. We walk in together. Together, she agreed. We stood there a while longer, the two of us, on the porch of a house that had been too quiet for too many years in the darkness before a morning that was going to change things permanently in one direction or the other. And then, from inside the house came the sound of Lily, not crying, not distressed, just awake and making the small exploratory sounds of a baby who had opened her eyes and found the world still there and had opinions about what should happen next. Clara pulled back and looked at me with an expression that was tired and determined and more completely herself than anything I had seen from her in the weeks since I had found her. Duty calls, she said. Go, I said. I'll be right behind you. She went inside the blanket, trailing behind her, and I stood on the porch alone for another moment, listening to the sounds of the house receive her, the soft click of the door, the particular creak of the third floorboard in the east hallway. And then Clara's voice, low and warm and certain, talking to her daughter in the darkness. I picked up my cold coffee. I looked out at the water one more time. Tomorrow, I thought. We finish it tomorrow. Before I reveal the shocking showdown at the gala and how we brought an empire to its knees. Comment still here below so I know you are riding this wave with me. And please note the following final chapters contain highly dramatic fictionalized events. If you prefer not to continue, you may turn off the video right here. The Plaza Hotel on a Saturday evening in December was exactly the kind of spectacle that New York did better than anywhere else on earth. The gold-lit facade, the line of black cars along Central Park South, the doormen in their long coats moving with the practiced efficiency of people who had been receiving the city's wealthy for over a century and had developed a precise and completely unsentimental relationship with the performance of it. Clara and I arrived at 9:47. We did not go in immediately. We sat in the back of the car on 58th Street while Ray's security detail confirmed positions through the earpiece I was wearing, and I watched the entrance of the plaza the way I had once watched the opening moves of hostile negotiations, noting who was where, what the exits were, how much time we had before the moment became irreversible. Ray's voice came through the earpiece. Julian is at the podium. Walsh's people confirm both DOJ agents are in position northeast and southwest corners. You have approximately 4 minutes before he reaches the announcement portion of the remarks. I looked at Clara. She was wearing a simple navy dress that Eleanor had driven to Charleston to find 3 days ago, and her hair was down, and she was holding Lily against her chest in the soft carrier Eleanor had also procured, because Clara had been clear that Lily was coming, and that was the end of that conversation. She looked in the dim light of the back seat like exactly who she was, a 31-year-old woman who had been through something that should have broken her and had not been broken, who was about to walk into a room full of people who had been told she no longer existed. She was not shaking. Her hands were completely still. Ready, Chum, I said. I've been ready for 6 weeks, she said. We got out of the car. Inside the ballroom was everything I remembered from the 3 times I had attended this event. The chandelier light catching the crystal and the jewelry and the carefully maintained surfaces of people who spent a great deal of money ensuring that nothing about them looked accidental. 400 guests in formal wear. A string quartet that had been replaced by a podium and a microphone. And at that microphone, in a tuxedo that fit him perfectly, Julian Belmont was speaking. I could hear his voice as we crossed the lobby toward the ballroom entrance. It had the modulated warmth of a man who had prepared these remarks carefully and was delivering them with the confidence of someone who believed completely and without reservation that the story he was telling was the only story there was. We reached the doors. Ray's voice in my ear, 30 seconds. I put my hand on the door handle. Beside me, Clara straightened her shoulders, one small, deliberate motion, the kind her mother used to make before she walked into a room she intended to own. "Together," I said. "Together," she said. I pushed open the door. The room did not react all at once. It happened in waves, the way awareness moved through a crowd, starting at the door, where the nearest guests turned first, and then spreading outward in a ripple of turned heads and interrupted conversations, and the particular silence that fell when 400 people simultaneously understood that something was happening that they did not have a script for. Julian Belmont stopped speaking. He was standing at the podium at the far end of the ballroom, and he stopped mid-sentence the way a man stopped when the ground shifted under him without warning. Not a dramatic pause, just a sudden, complete absence of words, as if the mechanism that produced them had simply ceased to function. He looked at the door. He looked at Clara. I watched his face from across the room, and I saw the exact moment he understood that everything he had constructed over the past 6 weeks had just become irrelevant. Clara walked forward. She did not hurry. She did not look at Julian, not yet. She looked at the room, at the faces turning toward her, at the journalists near the back wall, who were already reaching for their phones, at the people who had known her since childhood, and were now staring at her with the stunned expressions of people confronting something they had been told was impossible. She walked through the center of the ballroom with Lily against her chest, and her shoulders straight, and her eyes clear, and the crowd parted for her, the way crowds parted for things they did not fully understand, but recognized instinctively as significant. She reached the podium. Julian took a step back. It was involuntary, his body making a decision his composure had not authorized, and that single step backward told the room everything it needed to know about the two of them. Clara looked at him for exactly 3 seconds. Then she turned to face the room, leaned slightly toward the microphone, and said in a voice that was completely, absolutely steady, "My name is Clara Sterling, and I am very much alive." The sound that went through the room was not quite a gasp and not quite a murmur. It was something that had no precise name, the collective vocal expression of 400 people recalibrating their understanding of a situation simultaneously. A phone flash went off near the back wall, then another. Victoria Belmont was at a table near the front. I had seen her the moment we walked in, 70 years old, silver-haired in a dark gown, with the composed and slightly elevated expression she wore like a second skin. I watched that expression now as Clara spoke. I watched it hold and then develop very slowly, a quality I had not seen on Victoria Belmont's face in the 2 years I had known her. Uncertainty. Julian said something, could not hear it from where I was standing, but I saw his mouth move, and I saw Clara turn to look at him with an expression that stopped whatever he was saying before it reached the microphone. She turned back to the room. "I have a daughter," she said. "Her name is Lily." She lifted Lily slightly in the carrier, and the baby, as if understanding that this was her moment, opened her eyes and looked out at the ballroom with the serene, unimpressed attention of someone who had seen more difficult rooms than this. She deserves to know that her mother never stopped fighting for her. The flash of phones was continuous now. I was standing near the side wall, and I watched, and I did not move, because there was nothing left for me to do. Clara had the room. Clara had always been going to have the room. I understood that now, watching her stand at that podium, that the moment I found her at that checkout register in Henderson's Market, this was always where it was going. 2 men in dark suits moved through the crowd toward the front table where Victoria Belmont was sitting. She saw them coming. I watched her see them, the slight stiffening of her posture, the single moment in which the composed expression cracked entirely and showed what was underneath, which was not anger and was not defiance, but was something much simpler and much older than either of those things. She had known this moment was possible. She had simply believed it would never arrive. One of the men leaned down, and spoke quietly into her ear. Victoria Belmont set her champagne glass on the table with a hand that was for the first time in my experience of her not entirely steady. Clara did not speak on the drive back. She had said everything she needed to say inside that ballroom. Now she sat with Lily asleep against her chest and her head against the window, and I understood she needed these miles to let it become real. I did not break it. Eleanor was waiting at the front door. She took one look at Clara and opened her arms, and Clara walked into them without a word. I stood in the hallway watching them and decided that now was the moment. "Clara," I said, "come sit with me." She heard it in my voice. She handed Lily to Eleanor and followed me to the sitting room, and I told her about Lily's heart. All of it, the echocardiogram, Dr. Patel's assessment, the surgical consultation already scheduled for next week, the 96% success rate. I told it in the clearest order I could because Clara deserved clarity. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she looked at her hands. Then she looked up, eyes wet, voice steady. "How long have you known Che?" "2 weeks," I said. I told myself I was protecting you. That was partly true and partly not. She did not tell me I was wrong. She crossed the room, sat beside me, and put her head on my shoulder, the way she had not done since she was a teenager. My phone buzzed. Patricia Walsh federal indictment confirmed. Both of them. "It's done, Richard." "Good news," Clara said quietly. "Yes," I said. She exhaled slowly. "Then let it be done. I don't want to talk about them any more tonight." "Neither do I," said. From the hallway, Eleanor's voice floated in low and warm, talking to Lily. Small, engaged sounds floated back. Clara laughed. Short, exhausted, genuine. "She's going to spoil that baby completely." "Completely," I agreed. The hallway outside the surgical suite at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia was the longest hallway I had ever waited in. Not in terms of distance, in terms of minutes. I sat with my hands folded and my eyes on the door, and I did not check my phone, and I did not review documents. I just sat. For the first time in as long as I could remember, sitting was the only thing required of me, and I discovered it was harder than anything else I had done in the past 6 weeks. The door opened at 11:43. Dr. Patel came out still in his surgical gown, and the expression on his face told me everything before he crossed the hallway and sat beside me and said, "She came through beautifully. Lily is going to have a completely normal heart for the rest of her life." I pressed my hand over my eyes. "Just a moment." "Thank you," I said. My voice came out rough, and I did not apologize for it. Clara appeared 20 minutes later, wheeling Lily's bassinet from the recovery area. She looked up when she saw me, and her face did the thing it had done in Henderson's Market 6 weeks ago, every wall coming down at once. I stood, and she walked into my arms, and the bassinet was between us, and Lily was in it, sleeping the deep, untroubled sleep of a child whose heart had just been made whole. Ray stopped by the house that evening briefly without drama. Victoria and Julian had entered not guilty pleas, their assets frozen pending trial. Martin Cole had agreed to cooperate with federal prosecutors in exchange for a reduced charge. Ray did not stay long. There was nothing left to manage. That night I sat in the kitchen with Clara while Eleanor fed Lily at the counter, and the house smelled like chicken soup and lemon oil, and something else that had no name, the particular atmosphere of a place where people were safe and intended to remain that way. "Mom would have loved her," Clara said. I looked at Lily, at her hands curled against her chest, at the absolute peace of a child, who had come through something difficult and did not yet know it. She does, I said. I'm sure she does. Lily opened her eyes. She looked at me, and she smiled her first real smile, the kind that came from somewhere deeper than reflex. I reached out. She wrapped her fingers around mine with the uncalculating trust of someone who had decided without evidence that the world was worth holding on to. I held on, looking back on everything that happened. Every decision, every moment. I told myself to wait, to give space, to trust the story someone else was telling me about my own daughter. I carry one lesson above all others. Do not wait for certainty before you act on love. I waited 6 weeks. 6 weeks that Clara spent on a concrete floor in the November cold, counting crackers in a Ziploc bag, keeping a recording that could bring down an empire because she knew no one was coming. She was right to prepare. She was wrong that no one was coming. I was just too slow. I believe that God places the people we love exactly where we need to find them. That Wednesday evening in Myrtle Cove was not coincidence. It was a second chance I almost did not take because I was afraid of being the father who interfered too much. Do not be like me. If something feels wrong about the people your children have chosen, ask the question. Ask it clearly. Ask it early. Love is not interference. Love is paying attention. This has been one of the grandpa stories that I carry closest to my heart. A family story about the moment a father stopped waiting and started moving. If these grandpa stories have meant something to you, if this family story has stayed with you the way it has stayed with me, please leave a comment below, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss another family story from this channel. Thank you for staying until the very end. The stories ahead contain some fictional elements crafted with the sole purpose of sharing something meaningful. If that is not the kind of content you are looking for, we understand completely. Please feel free to explore whatever speaks to you. But if you are still here, we are very glad you are.